3 days before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, my fiance told me I wasn't financially strategic enough for his future. He left me for a billionaire's daughter, completely unaware that the modest, vintage-loving girl he just dumped was actually eighth in line to a European throne. It was a rainy Tuesday evening in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Our tiny third-floor walk-up apartment smelled like hot glue-dried eucalyptus and cheap takeout. I was sitting on the floor in a pair of faded sweatpants, meticulously tying burlap ribbons around mason jars for our wedding centerpieces. We were on a strict budget. I was a kindergarten teacher, or at least that was the life I had chosen to live, and my fiancé, Declan Hayes, was a struggling tech entrepreneur trying to get his AI logistics startup off the ground. For 3 years, I had played the role of the devoted penny-pinching girlfriend. I paid the lion's share of our rent on my modest salary. I cooked his meals, ironed his shirts for pitch meetings, and listened to him practice his investor decks until I had them memorized. I wanted him to love me for me, not for the unimaginable wealth and titles attached to my family name back in Europe. I heard the heavy click of the front door unlocking. Declan walked in. He didn't take off his wet trench coat. He didn't look at the centerpieces. He just stood in the hallway staring at me with a cold, hollow expression that sent an immediate spike of dread through my chest. "Hey," I said, putting down the glue gun. "You're late. Did the meeting with Sequoia Capital run over?" Declan took a slow breath, his jaw tightening. "Charlotte, we need to talk, and I need you to just listen." I stood up, wiping my hands on my pants. "Okay, you're scaring me. What's wrong? Did the funding fall through?" "The funding is fine," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. "In fact, it's more than fine. But the wedding isn't happening. I'm calling it off." The words didn't compute. My brain simply refused to process them. "What, Declan? The wedding is on Saturday. My family is flying in tomorrow. The venue is paid for. What are you talking about?" "I'm sorry, Charlotte," he said, though his eyes didn't look sorry at all. They looked impatient. "I've outgrown this. I've outgrown us. My company is about to scale to a level you can't even comprehend. I'm entering a world of high-stakes equity black tie galas and global networking. You're a kindergarten teacher who clips coupons." "We clip coupons so you can afford to pay your developers," I yelled, my voice cracking. "I supported you, I funded your prototype with my savings, and I'll pay you back," he snapped, waving a dismissive hand. "With interest. But I need a partner who brings more to the table than emotional support and cheap casseroles. I need a strategic alliance." "A strategic alliance," I whispered, feeling the room spin. "Who is she, Declan?" He hesitated, but the arrogance in his posture gave him away. "Chloe Caldwell. Her father is Richard Caldwell. Caldwell Holdings." My stomach dropped. Caldwell Holdings was a massive commercial real estate and venture capital firm. They owned half the skyline in Boston. I met her at a mixer at the Mandarin Oriental 2 months ago. Declan continued twisting the knife with his brutal honesty. "She introduced me to her father. He's going to lead my Series A funding round. But more than that, Chloe understands my ambition. She belongs in the world I'm entering." "You don't, Charlotte. I'm sorry, but I have to be ruthless about my future. I looked at the man I was supposed to marry in 72 hours. The man whose head I had held when he cried over his early failures. The man whose ring, a modest cubic zirconia we bought together, was currently sitting on my left hand. He wasn't looking at a heartbroken woman. He was looking at an expired asset. "Pack your things," I said, my voice eerily calm, though my hands were shaking violently. "Actually, the lease is in your name," he replied smoothly, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a set of keys, dropping them onto the kitchen counter. "I've already moved my important stuff into Chloe's penthouse in Beacon Hill. My assistant will come for the rest on Monday." He turned and walked out the door. Just like that. 3 years of my life discarded for a Series A funding round and a penthouse zip code. I collapsed onto the floor, surrounded by the stupid burlap-wrapped jars, and wept until I threw up. I cried for the betrayal, for the humiliation, and for the sheer blinding unfairness of it all. I spent the next 4 hours calling vendors, sobbing as I canceled the caterer, the florist, the string quartet. But when the tears finally stopped around 3 a.m., something else took their place. A cold, sharp, metallic rage. Declan thought I was a peasant. He thought I was a stepping stone. I reached for my phone, scrolling past the missed calls from my bridesmaids, and dialed a number I rarely used. It rang twice before a deep, authoritative voice answered, despite the time difference. "Charlotte, my darling," my father said. "Is everything all right? Your mother and I are preparing for the flight?" "Papa," I rasped, staring at the empty space where Declan's shoes used to be. "The wedding is off. Don't fly to Boston." There was a heavy silence on the line. My father, Prince Johannes, of a deeply entrenched, fiercely protective royal house in Central Europe, did not react with panic. He reacted with terrifying precision. "Who broke the engagement?" he asked quietly. "He did. For a wealthy heiress." Another pause. The air in my apartment felt like it dropped 10 degrees. "I am sending the private jet to Hanscom Field," my father said softly. "Pack your bags, Charlotte. You're coming home. And as for the boy who insulted our bloodline, we will teach him a lesson in true wealth." By Friday, the day before what was supposed to be my wedding day, I was sitting on the terrace of my family's 18th century estate, overlooking the pristine waters of Lake Geneva. I had traded my thrifted sweatpants for a bespoke Loro Piana cashmere set. A maid had just poured my morning espresso into a Meissen porcelain cup. I was back to being Her Serene Highness Princess Charlotte. But inside, I was still the heartbroken girl from the Boston walk-up. I opened Instagram. I couldn't stop myself. Declan's profile, once filled with pictures of us hiking or eating pizza, had been scrubbed. In its place was a professionally shot photo of him and Chloe Caldwell standing on the balcony of her penthouse. Chloe was stunning, I had to admit, tall, blonde, dripping in inherited arrogance. On her left hand rested a massive emerald-cut diamond from Cartier. It had to be at least $200,000. The caption read, "When you know, you know. Building an empire with my queen. Series A closed. Next stop taking over the world. Hashtag Aegis Tech. Hashtag Power Couple." I threw my phone onto the wrought iron table. "Fascinating," a voice said. My father stepped out onto the terrace. Prince Johannes was a formidable man. He wore his tailored Tom Ford suits like armor. He wasn't just royalty. He was the chairman of our sovereign wealth fund, an entity that controlled hundreds of billions of euros globally, silently manipulating markets from the shadows. He picked up my phone and adjusted his reading glasses, inspecting the photo of Declan and Chloe. Richard Caldwell's daughter. My father mused, a dangerous smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Your ex-fiancé believes he is married into financial royalty." "Hasn't he?" I asked bitterly. "Caldwell Holdings is huge. They own half of Boston's commercial real estate." My father let out a dry, humorless chuckle. He sat down across from me and tapped his signet ring against the table. "Charlotte, my dear, this is why I always insisted you pay attention during your economics tutoring. Wealth that is loud is usually fragile." He slid a leather-bound iPad across the table to me. I looked at the screen. It was a confidential dossier compiled by our family's private intelligence team at the Wealth Fund. Caldwell Holdings. My father explained pouring himself a cup of coffee is an illusion. Richard Caldwell over-leveraged his company before the commercial real estate market contracted. His office buildings in Boston are operating at 40% capacity. He has outstanding loans with Goldman Sachs Barclays and a private equity firm in London. I scrolled through the financial summaries. The numbers were staggering. "He's drowning in debt," I whispered. "Exactly," my father said. "Caldwell is desperately trying to acquire high-potential tech startups like your Mr. Hayes' company to inflate his portfolio's perceived value and appease his creditors. It is a house of cards. And the beautiful thing about a house of cards, Charlotte, is that you don't even have to push it to make it fall. You just have to buy the table it sits on." I looked up at him, my heart skipping a beat. "What are you doing, Papa?" "Munom." Yesterday morning, our sovereign wealth fund established a shell corporation in Luxembourg. he said casually, taking a sip of his espresso. Through it, we have begun quietly purchasing Caldwell Holdings debt from Barclays and the private equity groups. By the end of next week, Richard Caldwell will owe us over $800 million, and we will be calling in the loans. A shiver ran down my spine. Declan had abandoned me for financial security, completely unaware that he had just hitched his wagon to a sinking ship and that my father owned the ocean. Over the next 3 weeks, I stayed off social media and focused on healing. I threw myself back into my royal duties, attending charity galas in Paris and private art auctions in London. I let the opulence of my real life wash away the lingering insecurities Declan had left me with. Every time I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw the insufficient kindergarten teacher. I saw a woman with a bloodline older than the United States, armed with resources that could crush her enemies without leaving a fingerprint. Meanwhile, the trap was closing. My father's financial advisors updated us daily. Caldwell Holdings was panicking. To secure the final round of funding for Declan's startup Aegis Tech, Richard Caldwell was attempting to restructure his massive debts. He had arranged an emergency meeting in London with his newly revealed primary creditor, the Luxembourg Shell Corporation owned by my family. Declan, acting as the golden boy prospective son-in-law, was going to be at that meeting. He was going to pitch Aegis Tech as the ultimate collateral to prove Caldwell Holdings had a lucrative future. They requested an in-person meeting at the Shard. My father told me one evening in his study, handing me a crystal tumbler of scotch. Next Thursday, they wish to negotiate terms with the mysterious European conglomerate that has suddenly acquired their financial lifelines. Are you going? I asked, taking the glass. My father smiled, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. No, my darling, you are. The thought of walking into that boardroom and facing Declan, not as the weeping girl he left on the floor of a cheap apartment, but as the executioner of his precious empire, made my blood sing. I need a new suit, I said. Thursday morning in London was appropriately overcast, a blanket of slate-gray clouds hanging low over the Thames. I arrived at the Shard in a chauffeured Mercedes Maybach S680, flanked by our family's private security detail and two of Europe's most ruthlessly efficient corporate attorneys, Alistair Kensington, a former M&A partner at Clifford Chance, and Beatrice Dubois, a lethal financial litigator from Geneva. I wore a sharply tailored emerald green Alexander McQueen suit that cost more than Declan's first 2 rounds of seed funding combined. A pair of Christian Louboutin stilettos clicked rhythmically against the polished marble as we bypassed the main reception and entered the private executive elevator, scanning a biometric clearance card that took us straight to the 72nd floor. The boardroom was a sprawling cathedral of glass and steel, offering a dizzying panoramic view of the London skyline. Sitting at the far end of the immense mahogany table were Richard Caldwell, looking significantly older and more haggard than his press photos suggested, and Declan Hayes. Declan was wearing a custom Brioni suit that he undoubtedly couldn't afford, desperately trying to project the aura of a Silicon Valley titan. Next to him sat Chloe Caldwell, tapping mindlessly on her phone, sporting a luxury handbag resting on the table like a trophy. She had tagged along to London for shopping at Harrods, treating this desperate financial summit as a minor inconvenience in her luxury itinerary. Alistair and Beatrice entered the room first, placing thick leather-bound dossiers on the table. "Good morning," Richard said, standing up with a strained, overly eager smile, extending a hand that was slightly trembling. "Richard Caldwell, and this is my prospective son-in-law, Declan Hayes, CEO of Aegis Tech. We are thrilled to finally meet the principals behind Aurelia Investments." Alistair ignored the outstretched hand, unbuttoning his suit jacket as he took a seat. "The principal will be joining us momentarily, Mr. Caldwell. I suggest you sit." Declan bristled at the blatant disrespect, leaning forward with that arrogant tech bro confidence I used to mistake for passion. "Look, we're all busy people. We have a solid restructuring proposal for the $842 million in outstanding liabilities, backed by the projected valuation of Aegis Tech's upcoming Series B. Your Series A hasn't even fully closed, Mr. Hayes," Beatrice noted coldly, not looking up from her iPad. "Do not attempt to leverage imaginary money in this room." Before Declan could snap back, the heavy oak double doors opened. The room fell dead silent as I stepped across the threshold. I didn't rush. I walked with the slow, deliberate grace drilled into me by decades of royal protocol, my posture flawless, my expression entirely unreadable. Chloe looked up from her phone, her brow furrowing in confusion. Richard looked entirely lost. But Declan's reaction was a masterpiece of human panic. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, chalky white. His jaw actually dropped, and his eyes darted from my Alexander McQueen suit to the phalanx of security guards outside the glass doors, trying to comprehend an impossible reality. Charlotte. Declan choked out, his voice cracking like a terrified teenager. What are you doing here? How did you get past security? Sit down, Declan. I said, my voice carrying a quiet, terrifying authority that he had never heard from the girl who used to pack his lunches. I took the seat at the head of the table directly opposite Richard Caldwell. I folded my hands over the leather dossier, the heavy, flawless sapphire of my grandmother's heirloom ring catching the overhead lights. Allow me to introduce Her Serene Highness Princess Charlotte. Alistair announced, his voice echoing in the stunned silence. Chairwoman of the European Sovereign Wealth Consortium that holds the entirety of Caldwell Holdings' corporate debt. Princess? Chloe shrieked, dropping her phone onto the table with a loud clatter. Richard's face contorted in sheer, unadulterated horror. He looked at Declan, then at me, the catastrophic truth slowly dawning on him. Declan, is this the ex-fiancé? I don't understand. Declan stammered, gripping the edge of the mahogany table so hard his knuckles turned white. You're a kindergarten teacher. You lived in a walk-up in Cambridge. You clipped coupons. I lived a quiet life because I wanted to see if you loved me for who I was, not for what my family controlled. I replied smoothly, leaning back in my chair. It was an incredibly illuminating social experiment, and you, Declan, failed spectacularly. I opened the dossier in front of me. Let us dispense with the pleasantries. Mr. Caldwell, your real estate portfolio is hemorrhaging capital. Your occupancy rates in Boston are at 38%. You are in default on 3 major covenants. As of this morning, Aurelia Investments is officially calling in the $842 million you owe. You can't do that, Richard shouted, panic completely destroying his corporate veneer. We have a 90-day cure period. We have the Aegis Tech collateral. Ah, yes, Aegis Tech, I said, turning my gaze to Declan. The sight of him sweating, his arrogant facade crumbling into dust, was more intoxicating than any champagne I had ever tasted. Alistair, please brief Mr. Hayes on the reality of his situation. Certainly, Your Highness, Alistair said, passing a document across the table. Mr. Hayes, 3 years ago, when you incorporated Aegis Tech, you were entirely out of funds. Her Highness graciously provided $75,000 from her personal accounts to pay your developers and secure your initial server space. It was a personal loan. Declan protested, his voice pitching higher. I was going to pay her back with interest. It was an equity investment, Beatrice corrected sharply. If you had bothered to have competent legal counsel read the incorporation documents Her Highness provided, rather than blindly signing them in a rush to pay your vendors, you would know that the $75,000 secured a 51% controlling stake in Aegis Tech. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes a devastating implosion. Declan stared at the contract Alistair had slid across the table, his eyes scanning the signatures. His signature. My signature. And the unassailable legal jargon that legally crowned me the majority shareholder of the very empire he thought he had built alone. No, Declan whispered, shaking his head rapidly. No, this is illegal. This is fraud. It is standard venture capital practice, Declan. I said, my tone laced with glacial pity. You simply lacked the financial strategy to recognize it. You wanted a partner who brought more to the table, didn't you? Well, here I am. I own the table. I own the chairs. I own your entire company. Chloe, finally grasping the magnitude of the disaster, turned on Declan with vitriolic fury. You idiot! she screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the glass walls. You told my father you owned the IP. You told us this company was your ticket to saving our portfolio. You're nothing. You don't even own your own algorithm. Chloe, please, Declan begged, reaching out for her hand. She slapped it away violently. Don't touch me, Daddy. Let's go. We need to call Goldman Sachs. We need to file for Chapter 11 before she freezes our domestic accounts. Richard Caldwell looked like a man who had just been sentenced to the absolute end of his career. He didn't say another word. He just stood up, his posture completely defeated, and stumbled toward the exit. His daughter trailed behind him, complaining loudly about how her pristine reputation in Beacon Hill was entirely ruined. Declan didn't follow them. He sat frozen in his chair, completely isolated, watching his entire future vaporize in the span of 15 agonizing minutes. The billionaire heiress was gone. The funding was dead. The company was mine. He looked up at me, real tears welling in his eyes. The arrogance had been completely stripped away, leaving only the pathetic, desperate man I had financially supported for 3 miserable years. Charlotte, he pleaded, his voice breaking pathetically. He actually slid out of his ergonomic chair and fell to his knees on the carpeted floor. Please, I made a mistake. A horrible, stupid mistake. I was blinded by the money, by the intense pressure to succeed. But it was always you. I love you. We can still get married. We can build this massive enterprise together. You have the capital. I have the vision, Solas. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing. No lingering anger, no profound sadness, no foolish affection. Just a profound clinical disgust at the hollow man kneeling before me. You don't have a vision, Declan. You have a massive ego and a terrible habit of underestimating the women in your life, I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket. And we are certainly not building anything together. I signaled to Beatrice, who immediately began laying out the strict terms of his termination. The corporate takeover directives. Immediate termination. You are officially removed as CEO of Aegis Tech, effective immediately. Asset seizure. You will be escorted from your offices in Boston within the hour. Your company laptop, your corporate vehicle, and your expense accounts are revoked. Non-compete enforcement. Because you signed a strict non-compete clause in that same foundational contract, you cannot work in the AI logistics sector for the next 10 years. You're ruining my life, he sobbed violently, his hands completely covering his face in despair. You ruined your own life, I corrected gently, stepping smoothly around his kneeling form. I am simply finalizing the necessary paperwork. I didn't wait for him to respond. I turned and walked out of the sprawling boardroom, Alistair and Beatrice following closely behind like well-oiled corporate machines. As the heavy oak doors clicked shut, severing my connection to Declan Hayes forever, I felt a massive, invisible weight lift permanently from my shoulders. Over the next 6 months, the global financial world watched in stunned fascination as the dominoes fell. Richard Caldwell officially filed for bankruptcy after Aurelia Investments aggressively seized his premium commercial assets to cover his massive debts. We auctioned off his towering Boston skyscrapers to the highest bidders, liquidating his once proud empire piece by piece. Chloe Caldwell's lavish lifestyle came to a grinding halt. She was last seen selling her designer handbags at a consignment boutique in Soho and complaining bitterly to internet tabloids about her father's gross financial incompetence. As for Declan, the former tech prodigy was reduced to a miserable cautionary tale in Silicon Valley. Without Aegis Tech and strictly barred by the ironclad non-compete clause from working in his specialized field, he was heavily forced to take a mid-level IT support job at a boring regional bank in Ohio. There were no black-tie galas, no global networking events, no luxury penthouse in Beacon Hill, just a gray cubicle, a cheap plastic headset, and the crushing daily realization of what he had so foolishly thrown away. I, however, fiercely flourished. I happily retained full ownership of Aegis Tech, successfully installing a brilliant female CEO who had genuinely earned her high-level position through sheer intellect and unwavering loyalty rather than cheap manipulation. Under her superb leadership, and heavily backed by my family's immense capital resources, the company successfully closed its Series B funding and completely revolutionized supply chain logistics across Europe. I never once went back to the tiny, cramped apartment in Cambridge. I moved permanently into a sprawling historical chateau in the Loire Valley, completely surrounded by acres of private vineyards and priceless Renaissance art. I proudly traded my miserable coupon clipping for global philanthropy, launching a massive international fund dedicated solely to providing venture capital exclusively to brilliant female entrepreneurs who desperately lack the traditional avenues of early-stage funding. Occasionally, when the beautiful summer evenings are quiet and I am peacefully sipping a vintage Bordeaux on my private terrace, I deeply think about that terribly rainy Tuesday when Declan walked through the front door and brutally broke my heart. I used to truly think it was the absolute worst day of my entire life. Now I fully realize it was the greatest, most profound gift he could have ever given me. He callously tried to discard me because he arrogantly thought I wasn't financially strategic enough for his grand, sweeping ambitions. He was absolutely right. I wasn't merely a strategy, I was the entire endgame. Did Princess Charlotte deliver the ultimate reality check? Or did Declan get exactly what he deserved for his ruthless betrayal? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you love this story of royal revenge, corporate takedowns, and ultimate karma, make sure to hit that like button. Share it with your friends who love a good plot twist, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible jaw-dropping real-life dramas every single week. See you in the next video.